Good afternoon. It's Friday, 8th of June, 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio today, Mark Anderson. Welcome to the programme, Mark.
Great to be back.
We've also got David Scott from north of the border, from Northern Exposure. And we have some guests live from Bilderberg, which we will come on to straight away. So let's get straight into this, Mark. Bilderberg Group meeting in Italy. You've mentioned this earlier in the week. The rise of populism is what Business Insider is claiming is high on the agenda. This is a big issue for them.
Oh, absolutely. The rise of populism and their concerns about free trade go hand in hand, as does the global cities thing going on in Chicago simultaneously. What's interesting this year, briefly, is the G7, rather than happening before or after Bilderberg, is happening during it, just like the Chicago Forum on Global Cities. And those two and Bilderberg are in a symbiosis right now on populism issues, free trade issues, global cities issues. At any rate, it's interesting this year in that we have some people on the ground that are looking at the more immediate happenings as we look at the bigger picture. And this is kind of a first in terms of my work as a Bilderberg reporter taking over for Jim Tucker from American Free Press days. We have Thomas Gasser from Switzerland, a videographer, Max Bachmann, also an independent news reporter out of Germany, and of course Dan Dix of Press for Truth on the ground. And this is a pretty good grouping. They're very experienced and very adept at covering Bilderberg.
Okay, welcome to the program, gents. What are your thoughts on Bilderberg so far then?
Well, so far it's been a little different from our previous experiences, in the sense that they're at a 4-star hotel here, and it's kind of it's in the middle of town, and there's really not a lot of protesters. There's not a whole heck of a lot of journalists like there have been in a few previous years. And, they seem to be trying to stay 2 steps ahead now, because, earlier we were at the airport trying to confront some Bilderbergers, as we always do. And we stayed there for about 8 hours until we realized something's not right. We're not really getting any of them. And that led us to believe, this is a bit of a diversion. So we left there and we went to the private airport, and then finally we're able to get some interesting video and confrontations at the private airport. So it's been pretty interesting so far.
Yeah, and at the private airport, you just mentioned the topic, rise of populism in Europe, and Dan got the question out to the Serbian Prime Minister, what she thinks of it. And as usual at Bilderberg, you don't really get an answer, especially from the distance. And yeah, I think she just smiled back at you or something.
They gave their classic, she kind of smirked and laughed it off, and hopped into her car and was whisked away by the police. But, the important thing is to get it on the record, and even sometimes their silence is louder than words.
It's also interesting that... Can I finish?
Yes, go ahead. Yes, please.
Yeah. Also interesting this year at the airport, like usually you get detained there, and people, you have to show your passport, etc. But this year they set up kind of a call it a free speech zone where reporters could go. And Thomas, you stuck there for a while to get a couple of people getting in from the airport. So they used the side entrance. Maybe you can tell us what happened there.
Yeah, we catch some pretty good members at the at this airport, at this private sector, who's actually not for the publics, because it's for the crew members. And yeah, we catch Rudolf Scholten, who is in the steering committee, and I shouted him on German, and he was very surprised. So we get some good shots there, yeah.
Okay, good stuff. Now, I mean, do you think that they are perhaps this location that they have that they've announced, this hotel is a 4-star hotel? Is that where they're actually meeting, or is this a decoy?
No.
We have lost the audio, unfortunately.
We lost the audio a bit, guys. If you can hear us.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
any more? 1 2 1 2.
No, unfortunately, we're going to have Yeah, unfortunately, we're going to have to move along from that. David, let me bring you into the program at this point. You sort of had commented to me earlier on the fact that aside from populism, clearly AI and the future of robotics and so on is high on the agenda.
Yes, once again, this is one of the key aspects. One of the people quoted as being British, who is at the Bilderberg conference, although he doesn't speak with a British accent, sounds like he's from the States, is a specialist in AI and a really, really boring engineering geek, I'd have to say. I tried to watch one of his YouTube videos to find out what he believed. Really didn't do very well. He is one of the most boring men I've ever listened to, but he knows a lot about AI, and it's going to transform all of our lives. I never found out how.
Somebody else that's there for the first time is a representative from the Vatican. This is Cardinal Pietro Parolin, who's the Secretary of State for the Vatican. He has appeared there for the first time ever. I don't know what to read into that, but they're saying that this has not been officially announced by the Vatican. Sources within the Secretary of State have confirmed that he's scheduled to take part in the meeting. Of course, we won't know what's discussed. Any thoughts on that?
Well, this is pretty unprecedented. I spoke to the former Swiss banker Francois de Siebenthal, who's a monetary reformer right now, and he's a longtime Catholic, and even he was taken aback by this. This is very unusual, as is the Bilderbergers lowering themselves to the equivalent of a Super 8 hotel in Italy. A 4-star to them is like a Motel 6 to us. At any rate, we'll see where this goes. I'm going to be looking at this much more as to what this means and why he's there. It's a little too soon to tell at this point.
Okay. Max, if we have you back, just briefly, what are your thoughts on where this goes for the rest of the weekend? No, I'm sorry, we can't hear you at all. So that is that's really unfortunate. I'm sorry about that. Right, we'll have to move on.
Maybe we can try him one more time in a minute. We'll see.
We'll have to move on in the meantime. Let's move on to this. The Bilderberg Association, Mark. Now this was we first came across this in 2013 whenever Kenneth Clarke was put on the spot in the House of Commons following the 2013 Bilderberg meeting, which is the first place that I'm aware where they set up a free speech zone of the type that the guys were talking about there.
Correct.
And of course the question for Michael Meacher was who was going to be paying for the police operation and so on. And Kenneth Clarke said that the Bilderberg Association would be picking up the tab for that. But before we get on to that, I just wanted to highlight this particular quote from their latest annual report and financial information, saying that what they do is they ensure that key UK decision makers and opinion formers are able to address current issues of public policy in private exchanges with senior counterparts from across Europe, the United States, Canada, confers public good by informing and enriching subsequent national debate and decision taking. Exchanges at annual conferences also do substantive immediate good by reducing misunderstandings and helping to identify common ground on issues of transatlantic or intra-European concern or disagreement. Finally, the conferences facilitate the development of a network of personal relationships to be formed between individuals of responsibility and influence relationships which could be leveraged in subsequent interactions at important moments. And really, this is quite an admission because
it is.
Because in the mainstream press, we're constantly told that there's nothing to see here, move along.
Absolutely.
And even when Kenneth Clarke was commenting in to Michael Meacher in the House of Commons in 2013, that was pretty much his message: nothing to see here, move along. But this is quite clear that they're talking about private exchanges with counterparts across Europe, United States, Canada. They're talking about setting up networks and being able to leverage those networks at important moments.
Yeah, what we're looking at here, Mike, is annual reports in a certain financial period that the Bilderberg Association has to file under the Charities Act in UK of 2011. And in each of these reports, there is this explanation that you just got done reading. And what it really explains, without being overly explicit, but it's sufficiently explicit, is that policy is definitely on the table and that they are networking and associating so they can develop more leverage over the long term toward the formation and the massaging of policy completely contrary to the denials, like you say, that they always give us. And what this is when they say this, keep in mind that they're trying to justify describing themselves as a charity. I don't see charitable activities in that paragraph.
Well, that is exactly what I was going to ask David, because you've got some experience in your in running sort of charitable organisations. Does that sound like a charity to you?
No, not really. It sounds like a conspiracy to me. It sounds like what it is, which is people meeting behind closed doors to discuss policy affecting everyone, but everyone doesn't get to hear what's been said and what's been planned.
Well, look, anybody that wants to go and look at the Bilderberg Association, they can get onto the Charity Commission website and find it there. They can find the financial information. You can see that they only really have spent one large amount of money once, and that was during the 2013 event itself. And I note that Ms. Zanny Minton, what's her name?
Zenti Minton-Beddoes in The Economist.
That's right. So she is a trustee of the charity, and of course she's at this year's event representing The Economist. The Economist, one of the biggest globalist outlets going.
Along with FT, right?
Absolutely.
In terms of Bilderberg.
So look, let's move on then, because this is, of course, you mentioned already that the G7 is taking place at exactly the same time, and most of the furore over the G7 is over tariffs and the major falling out, it seems, between Western leaders and Donald Trump. Many people in the mainstream media suggesting that this is actually G6+1 because Donald Trump is excluding himself from the event. And in fact, I understand that he is going to leave the G7 tomorrow morning at 10:30. He's not actually taking part in the whole event. And he's basically leaving it to Everett Eisenstadt, his Deputy Assistant for International Economic Affairs, to take part in the rest of the sessions.
Wow.
So I thought that was quite an interesting rebuff
It
to
is.
Western leaders. Emmanuel Macron, well, let's have a look at Theresa May arriving. This is really exciting stuff. Here she is in Royal Air Force One, which isn't quite the same scale as your version, Mark.
A bit more modest, yes.
I think it's an Airbus. So she's arrived and she's going to walk down the steps in a minute. But this concern about tariffs is really driving the angst here. Theresa May actually being quite conciliatory. She's saying, back off a little bit to her European colleagues, back off a little bit on Donald Trump. Donald Trump saying that he's sick of her schoolmistress attitude and really she should just go away. So I thought that was quite amusing. But here they are already getting gathered. So this is, of course, the European Commission and the European Council represented at the G7. So last time we were talking about this, David, I was speculating that these tariffs that Donald Trump was trying to apply were really part of the sort of bargaining chip to try and get the EU countries to properly contribute to NATO. I think you thought there was possibly something in that analysis, but the G7 seems to be falling apart.
Yes, well, we're not 8 anymore. Russia's gone, and we're seeing it's a very strange policy. I mean, walking out in the G7 for the President of the United States is just astounding. I'm really surprised by that. Everett Eisenstadt was the Assistant United States Trade Representative for the Americas before. So we're seeing he's leaving it to a bureaucrat. He's leaving it to a fairly faceless bureaucrat. It's not even a sort of top political post. This is saying, I'll pay lip service to this, but I'm not interested. It rather suggests to me that there's a much wider change in American policy being worked out here. This is not normal, and I don't even think it's to lean on people for money. What are we seeing here? Are we seeing America withdraw from Europe? Is that the policy?
I can't say that it is, bearing in mind that they've got a fairly large military contingent in the eastern part of Europe at the moment. So I mean, they can't withdraw from Europe entirely. But certainly, is Trump starting to? Well, we're going to come on to the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, in a minute. Is Trump perhaps starting to look east?
Well, this is one question. There's a lot of chat about the South China Sea. There's a lot of chat about the political situation compared with China. I'm actually at a bit of a loss. What is the policy? It seems extremely opaque. Doesn't seem joined up at all.
But that opaqueness is surely because he, as soon as he tries to be transparent about what he's doing, he gets attacked from all sides, including from the inside. So his best policy has got to be something approaching secrecy.
Well, that's a fair point, but it still begs the question: what is the policy? What is he trying to do? Make America great again. It's not isolationist because it's overtly militaristic. So it's not an isolationist policy. How can you have an aggressive military stance on a global scale and not seek to have the diplomatic backup on a similar scale? Doesn't seem to be joined up to me.
Interesting point.
Yeah. Any thoughts?
Well, I once heard Trump referred to as a Jacksonian, and that was at a Chicago Council on Global Affairs meeting by a well-noted think tank guru or wonk. And Jacksonian means not totally isolationist, but a pretty vigorous military footing for the U.S., but a more nationalistic domestic policy. And so it's not quite isolationist, and it's certainly not full-blown globalist. So maybe this is Trump the Jacksonian. At least that's according to the think tanks who are looking at him with great concern.
Okay. Well, let's move on to the SCO. President Xi of China and President Putin of Russia. The headlining, as Sputnik puts it. So this takes place the 9th and the 10th, tomorrow and Sunday. And it's taking place in China, of course. Besides this conference itself, they are also going to be holding some side meetings, including with India's Prime Minister Modi, and they're all going to be attending the summit, of course. And they've announced that they're going to hold one-to-one talks on the sidelines of the conference. So this clearly setting itself up as being the place to be in terms of economic development in the future. And in fact, not just for economic development, the CSTO is probably, this is probably an acronym that many people don't know, but the CSTO is kind of an opposition to NATO in a sense. It's many of the old Russian states plus Russia getting involved in a military cooperation organization, a bit like NATO. They are looking at closer partnership with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. This is this a shift in relationships between India and China? Certainly, India in recent weeks and months, or at least recent months, has been pretty critical of China. So perhaps the fact that Modi's there, that they're getting involved in potentially closer cooperation at the SCO, is a very interesting development as well. So we watch that with interest. David, any thoughts?
You're looking here at an area that's surrounding the Silk Road. You're looking at an area that's going to be looking at an anti-US military stance, because it's going to be continental and not maritime. And what is the link then going to be between India and China? No thoughts. I'm sorry.
Right. Okay. Okay. I mean, but this is an interesting point you make. It is a land-based Silk Road mainly. Of course, there's got to be huge amounts of shipping as well. But they are building huge infrastructure links. I saw a video this morning showing the infrastructure links from China to Pakistan, and Pakistan getting pretty excited about the economic development that's coming along with this. So, I mean, Modi has got to be looking at this from the position of developing India in this way, is he not?
Well, this is it. This is huge scale global geopolitics. This is things on a vast scale, a continental scale. And you're then saying, well, where does it stop? Because the automatic zone of influence stretches right the way through to the Middle East, to Turkey, to the area around about the Caspian, and there's lots of interesting geopolitical assets there, including oil. And this is going to bring it into conflict with the maritime view and with the maritime powers, principally the United States. Where's that conflict going to be? It's going to be somewhere around the Middle East. It's going to be maybe Syria. You know, that would be about right for the point of friction. And that's what we're seeing. I think it's tremendously interesting, but to give you anything that's really sort of insightful is I'm not able to do that at the moment because there's so much that's only just emerging. It's certainly an area to watch.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. Now, let's just quick advertisement for Alternative View 9 DVDs. They are now for sale on the UK Column website.
Great.
Anybody wants to get hold of them, they will not be being shipped until the 1st of July. So between now and then, they're available for a slight discount, so $59.99 for those. Get them if you can, if you want to pre-order. Okay, the United Nations has been busy on human trafficking. They've decided that they are going to put sanctions on 6 human traffickers operating in Libya. So the United Nations Security Council yesterday slapped sanctions on 6 leaders of human trafficking networks operating in Libya, a first for the world body, according to diplomats. Well, what did Boris Johnson have to say about this? He was hugely excited. He said, "I'm pleased that the UK, working closely with our partners, has secured United Nations Security Council agreement to impose sanctions against 6 major people traffickers operating in Libya." He said the sanctions directly target 6 individuals who are complicit in committing serious human rights abuses against migrants, including women and children. They've harmed their own communities and contributed to instability, lawlessness and insecurity more widely in Libya. As a result of our action at the UN, which has the full support of the government of Libya, these traffickers will have their assets frozen and be banned from all international travel. These sanctions demonstrate our resolve to tackle people traffickers and organised criminal gangs that pay no heed either to the desperate human suffering caused by their despicable trade or to international borders. To me, David, this seems more like getting rid of the opposition than anything else. Because, of course, as we've highlighted on this program many times, the profits that are being made through human trafficking are absolutely massive, and the government funding for dealing with human trafficking are pitifully small. So there's clearly no serious effort by the British government to actually deal with this problem. And of course, why is this problem so distinct in Libya? Well, because we bombed the hell out of that country and turned it into a third world country once again, leaving people within Libya very few options for earning a living, which of course becomes ripe ground for this type of criminal activity. Since the destination of many of these people that are being trafficked is the UK, and many of them ending up in sexual slavery and also as well as other types of so-called modern slavery, the hypocrisy out of Boris Johnson's lips continues to stagger.
It does. I mean, there is no excuse at all for our policy, for the British government policy, French government policy, Western government policy on Libya. It was a classic case of destabilize a country and then use the instability as an excuse to intervene and change a regime. They keep running the same scenario and believing that we haven't sussed it out. We can see quite clearly what's happening. We can see quite clearly the horrendous implications for ordinary men and women in that country, and indeed all across Europe, because Libya was a stabilizing influence in the whole continent of Africa, as has now been seen. Now, in terms of people trafficking, and Boris Johnson talking about, was it instability and lawlessness?
Yes.
Well, look, these things start at home, right? And I'm all for doing things about people trafficking, but the place to go to do something about people trafficking is you go down to the local sauna in whatever part of London he is, and you interview the girls there and you ask them 2 questions. And I learned this from someone who'd been through this personally. You ask them at what age did they get into prostitution, and who introduced them to it. Right, and what you will find is the ages will be very young, because a lot of these girls came out of the care system, out of children's homes. And the names as to who actually trafficked them into prostitution the same names will keep coming up. And you get those names and you arrest them. And then we're doing something about people trafficking. And when we start to do something about trafficking our own people, the most vulnerable girls and young men in our society, then we can start talking about Libya.
Yes, I couldn't agree more, David, couldn't agree more.
I would add that if Bojo is so serious and the United Nations is so serious, trafficking through South Central America, Mexico, up into Texas is endemic through the drug cartels and the MS-13 Salvadoran gangs. I mean, if arresting trafficking is the goal, let's go where it's really happening on a large scale without there having been a bombing like in Libya in 2011, although trafficking can also be arguably attributed to the not only bombing on the Libyan end of the scale, but the open border policies of much of the European Union providing incentives for people to migrate in unnatural and unusually high numbers at an unusually high pace throughout Europe. So in a way, the European Union is involved in trafficking by forcing people out of their home countries and then laying the groundwork for a over-migration far beyond the natural numbers subsequent to those bombings.
Okay, well, you've mentioned the EU, so let's get on to that and Brexit. And, you know, I've been struggling, Mark and David, I've been struggling to find an EU institution that we're actually leaving as part of Brexit. And so I was really shocked and surprised to find that in fact we are leaving Euratom. This is the regulator for nuclear issues in Europe. Or are we? Well, let's see, shall we?
I want to know here.
Because the UK apparently is meeting milestones for Euratom exit. They have passed some legislation, nuclear safeguards legislation, that's passed through Parliament. It's about to get royal assent. This is a nuclear safeguards bill, one of the first pieces of legislation addressing the UK's departure from the European Union to complete the passage through Parliament. It's, as I say, shortly going to become an act once it gets royal assent, and addresses the UK's departure from Euratom, an international organisation, as they say, that governs the peaceful use of nuclear energy within the EU. So we're leaving that, but in the process we've signed 2 new safeguards agreements with the International Atomic Energy Agency, and these key agreements are a major milestone, they say, in Euratom exit preparations and provide the basis for civil nuclear trading arrangements. Okay, so that's that bit. This is the regulation side of things. But just a couple of weeks ago, on the 21st of May, Theresa May made it clear that in fact we're not leaving Euratom because we're not leaving the research and teaching aspect of it. So what she said was the United Kingdom would like the option to fully associate ourselves with the excellence-based European science and innovation programs, including the successor to Horizon 2020 and Euratom research and training. It is it's in the mutual interests of the UK and the EU that we should do so. Of course, such an association would involve an appropriate UK financial contribution, which we would willingly make. In return, we would look to maintain a suitable level of influence in line with that contribution and the benefits we bring. So, David, we've brought in some legislation which deals with the regulatory aspect of it. We're now going to be separate from the European regulatory regime, and we've actually made connections with the IAEA, and also we've made a separate agreement with the United States. So that's all done and dusted. But we absolutely want to stay within Euratom for the research and training section, and of course we will make a financial contribution. And of course, with that financial contribution, we will want our sort of influence there. So not really very much has changed.
Oh, I'm just looking at the European Commission Twitter account here. European Commission, we support daring ideas to explore the frontiers of knowledge with Horizon Europe and a budget of, are you waiting for this? 97.9 billion euros. The biggest ever research and innovation funding program, presumably in the world. Yeah, so there we go. So I don't know what our share of 97.9 billion euros is, but I'm betting it's quite a lot.
Well, it doesn't end there because Eureka, we are absolutely sticking with that one as well. Now, the thing about Euratom is that it's not formally, or it isn't formally an EU institution. So when we signed the letter saying we were leaving the European Union, we had to have a special clause for Euratom. Eureka is pretty much the same. This is what is described as you can see on screen there, as an intergovernmental network. It was established in 1985. Britain was one of the founding members of it. But Sam Gyamah, who's science minister, is launching Britain's chairmanship of this organisation, which will last for a year. British businesses and innovators are going to get a financial boost of £10 million to bring their ideas to the global market, as Britain is deciding to double down on innovation, including Horizon and Euratom, as we've just discussed. So the Science Minister has launched the UK's chairmanship of the International Innovation Network, addressing the global challenge to hunt for world-changing products and services needing support to reach market. And this is part of £35 billion in projects in 40 countries worldwide. These, of course, are the EU 28 plus a few other partners, but the EU 28 is absolutely at the centre. Now, they say that Eureka is not an EU research programme, but rather an intergovernmental organisation of which the EU is a member. Cooperation and synergy are sought between Eureka and the research activities of the EU properly, notably with the European Union's Horizon 2020 and the European Research Area. So it is absolutely all enmeshed and intermeshed, but yes, huge quantities of money.
And isn't it a strange description of innovation? Right? What we're saying is, well, we need more bureaucrats to choose the winners because that'll work. We need an enormous network of obscure government and non-government and semi-government organizations all moving taxpayers' money around and picking the winners because innovation can't happen in any other way. This is just bizarre.
Well, I have to say this is probably my biggest concern about this, David, because they're putting these huge quantities of EU money into innovation and research, but who gets to decide which pots that money goes into? So whose innovation and research is it? Clearly, they're not going to put money into something which is researching something which is perhaps doesn't conform to the climate change policy, for example. So anything that's outside EU policy isn't going to get funding. So that makes it a bit more like innovation on behalf of the EU, on behalf of the British government, on behalf of other national governments, and perhaps for military use or something else, not necessarily for the benefit of humanity as such.
Well, this is exactly the point. It's politically driven, politically led. So they'll be in the interest of the political elite. It won't be in the interest of the common man necessarily. And then when you've got that amount of money sloshing around, it obviously affects other investment, because if you've got state backing, that will also funnel in private funds, which means they're not going somewhere else. So it's very much, well, we're going to control the fund. We're going to control the innovation. I was once in an interview, a job interview, and it was really dull. And I thought, these people might offer me the job and I have no idea what to do. So I said, well, what's your policy on innovation? I said to them. And the three people interviewing me looked at one another and clearly they didn't have one, and equally clearly they were going to make one up on the spot. And the answer was, well, we don't mind you innovating as long as you only innovate where we tell you to innovate.
Yeah.
And I think this is kind of what we're seeing at a governmental level. It's controlling industry. right? And what's the system where nominally private industry is controlled by government diktat? That would be fascism.
Yes, indeed.
Well, the individual is completely carved out of this. I don't see Nikola Tesla or Thomas Edison here or any other innovators like we had in days of yore. Absolutely, this is a technocratic approach, like outlined by books like books written by those like Zbigniew Brzezinski and other late Bilderbergers and Trilateral members that foresaw this bureaucratic, top-down command control approach and wanted to perfect it towards certain goals, prescribed goals. And so this is that. This is not the heady days of the entrepreneur and the the era and age of invention like we had in the early 20th century, let's say, in the United States.
I'm sorry, Mark, you're just being nostalgic.
Well, yeah, I'm being nostalgic, like I'm not supposed to be in the new world where we have no past, as the EU prescribes.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move on north of the border now, David. Edinburgh families told to plug the gap in care for the elderly. Do Edinburgh families have the resources to plug the gap in care for the elderly?
They're jolly well going to have to find the resources because they're not going to be given a choice. This is a fascinating little article. So the Edinburgh Integration Joint Board. Now this is a combination of council and NHS running social and health care as an integrated whole. Is set to undergo a, quote, major culture change, or where have we heard that one before, that will see the onus placed on patients to look after themselves or receive help from relatives. So this is the equivalent of pick up thy bed and walk, but there's no miracle involved. It's just leave, you're costing us money. Another wonderful quote, health chiefs are now set to have a, quote, big conversation with the public about what might be deemed a reasonable contribution from individuals, their relatives, neighbours, local communities to provide elements of social care for themselves. The board has launched an action plan to get to grips with the service. The new approach will include a shift towards preventative and early intervention. So I'm very sorry, you're fat. We're going to have to do something about that because you'll cost us money in the future, or you're smoking, or you're whatever you're doing that the state at that point doesn't like. We're going to prevent that to reduce dependency on acute services and crisis support. Ricky Henderson, chairman for Edinburgh Integration Joint Board, said, quote, supporting people to live as independently as possible in their own homes and community means that we will have to think carefully about how our invaluable health and social services are provided. Invaluable meaning unaffordable, I think, is what we're looking at there. Now this little diagram next, this is meant to be an improvement. Now, a couple of things struck me about this. It's a really bizarre diagram because the line's going in every direction and it's not at all clear who's responsible to who, which I think is part of the point. Some of these symbols read some hospital-based services, so it's not even clear as to which services are included in the system and not. But the bit I particularly liked is right up at the top. The pounds come from the NHS and the local authority into the joint board, and coming the other way is directions. So we pay them and they tell us how to operate. Okay, that is a very bizarre route to be following. Normally, the golden rule is he who has the gold makes the rules. No, this is reversed now.
Now he who has the gold pays someone else to make the rules on their behalf?
Well, on someone's behalf. It's not clear on whose behalf. You know, so it's a strange. It's a part of the system becoming ever more opaque, ever more complex. There was this, just before we leave that, the vision of this, the vision of this organisation, people in organisations working together for a caring, healthier, and safer Edinburgh. Now, that's presumably a grammatical mistake. It should be more caring, because that would imply there's no caring in Edinburgh at the moment, which was something that you might have implied if you're in Glasgow, but not really something they should be saying. They introduced safer. Does that mean police is going to come into this as well? I wonder.
Yeah.
And their values, with respect to principles of equality, that's a dangerous little principle right there. Human rights, as opposed to God-given and inalienable rights. Independent living. Now, I would point out you better be independently living, or you could be in trouble. And will treat people fairly, which is, of course, nowhere to find. So it's just it sounds positive, it sounds friendly, but I think there's a lot more to see there.
I mean, treating people fairly, it's pretty clear. Everybody's going to be treated equally badly.
Well, you see, but what does equality mean, right? Because if equality means equality of outcome, that means tyranny, right?
It sounds like they're cutting the lifeline. Slowly but surely, the knife is going into the lifeline. They're just not going to cut it too quickly. That's my impression.
Oh, quite clearly, and it's going to be, everything's going to be unaffordable. So we're looking for relatives and neighbourhoods and neighbours to provide the services themselves, which they were doing before we started the Stalinist welfare state. And well, we're just going to very slowly admit that it doesn't work and put the onus for the services back on individuals, but not the control. I suspect the control will stay centralised.
Absolutely. Well, let's look at another aspect of centralised control, because of course Facebook being ubiquitous, this is becoming a form of centralised control. This is a fantastic headline. Facebook is now trying to hire news credibility specialists to deal with its fake news problem. So this is Gizmodo, and they're saying years ago Facebook fired its trending news team and replaced them with algorithms after a Gizmodo article featured former workers claiming that the site discriminated against conservative news. Then Facebook tried and failed to suppress hoax news sites and propaganda with a series of methods designed to avoid the ire of conservatives, like third-party fact-checkers and yet more algorithms. In the meantime, the so-called fake news problem grew worse than ever. Well, of course, because it's got the entire mainstream media behind it. Of course, it's going to grow worse than ever. But anyway, we go on. It says, now it looks like Facebook is back to hiring staff to help it sort the problem out directly. Per a report in Business Insider as of Thursday, Facebook had 2 contract positions for news credibility specialists open on its job site. The jobs are based out of Menlo Park, California, where the site is headquartered, and one of them lists fluent Spanish as a requirement. We're seeking individuals with a passion for journalism who believe in Facebook's mission of making the world more connected, is what the listings were saying. As a member of the team, you'll be tasked with developing a deep expertise in Facebook's news credibility program. You'll be conducting investigations against predefined policies. So there we go. Clearly, the algorithms haven't worked, and I have to say this sort of makes a mockery of this whole drive for AI, because surely AI is capable of dealing with this minor problem of so-called fake news on Facebook. They've got rid of the algorithms, having originally had a team of real people to do the job, having fired them, replaced them with algorithms, now fired the algorithms, and now they're hiring new people to do the job again. This seems to be, David, an insurmountable problem.
Yes, and what's it based on? It's based on the sort of BBC-esque view that you can have a news report and it can be entirely neutral. It can be entirely impartial and entirely value-free. This is a lie, right? Everyone is partial, everyone has values, and it must show through. And the best thing to do is to be honest about it. And that's something that Facebook doesn't seem to be able to do. Certainly the BBC doesn't. We'd like to think that we do.
Okay, well, look, let's end on this one then. Common law courts and common law and so on. Tell us about the first female keeper in Scotland.
First female keeper is now the second female keeper because she's left her job. Now, this happened at the same time as a dispute with the Common Law Court, which, as you know, is starting to find its feet and was recently convened in Glastonbury in England, and is going to have another meeting in Dundee quite shortly. Now, the issue was the Common Law Court and some of the people behind it sought to have legal documents registered with the Registers of Scotland, specifically commercial liens initially. And Registers of Scotland said, no, we're not doing that. we're not just registering anything. You need a court order. So a court order was obtained from the common law court, and they still said no. And this then included lis pendens as well, which is actions against attached against property title, which has the effect of advertising a future claim and preventing property being bought and sold. So the Registers of Scotland said, no, we're not doing that. And then it was pointed out, though, that those very legal agreements that you're saying you don't register, you do register, because you've previously registered them. And then the explanation was, well, we've changed our policy. And would you believe that the change in policy was dated 10 days before the common law court submitted their documentation? That's just a coincidence, I'm sure. Now, then the common law court started to ask questions like, where is the lawful right to do this? Where is the statutory right to do this? On what law are you basing? Because essentially what the Registers of Scotland are doing are withdrawing common law rights from the people based on their internal policy and nothing else. And they're not getting any answers. And then notice was served on the keeper, the head of the organisation. And when this was happening, then she announced her retirement around about Christmas, and she left post at the end of March this year. So it all seemed a little coincidental. We don't know if it's related. We have to be quite clear. We don't know that it's in any way related. But it is interesting to see that there is no explanation from Registers of Scotland as to why their policy's changed, what the previous policy was, or what the lawful or indeed statutory justification for what they're now doing is. It's interesting that also around a week after two members of the Common Law Court were escorted from the Registers of Scotland building by the police, the Registers of Scotland changed the policy to say that the public can no longer enter the building without an appointment, which had been something that was happening quite happily for the decades previously. So one thing we can be quite certain of, that this organisation, as in many other parts of the state, is reacting to the common law court and to the common law movement. It's reacting with hostility and denial, but it is reacting. And that's a very interesting thing to note.
Okay, look, we're just about out of time. Let me just ask you, David, what's the next steps for the Fresh Start Foundation?
We are meeting we're meeting at the Beacon Arts Centre in Greenock on Saturday. That is tomorrow at 11 AM to 3 PM. So if people are in the Greenock area or Glasgow area, or can make it along, please come along. The speaker is Brian Clare, principal speaker is Brian Clare, who has been campaigning and fighting for justice for child sexual abuse victims for decades, and he is a mine of information, and he knows exactly the nature of this fight. We're really looking forward to hearing what he has to say. There'll be other speakers as well supporting Brian. And it'll be, once again, a really positive, good day. And I'm looking forward to it enormously.
Thank you very much for that. Some closing thoughts?
Yeah, I want to thank Thomas Gasser and Max Bachman and Dan Dix for being on, despite the technical problems, out of Bilderberg for the Turin meeting, June 7 through 10 for 2018. Look for them to be possibly on Type 1 radio this coming Saturday, and also possibly alternate current radio. I'll check into those options as well while Bilderberg is still going. It's a tight window. And look for some further articles on Bilderberg by myself at AmericanFreePress.net and TheTruthHound.com. But we're coming at it from different angles and looking harder at the Bilderberg Association, how it compares to the American Friends of Bilderberg. That's its counterpart in the United States. And it's kind of a new tack here, a new line of inquiry, despite the brief mention by Kenneth Clark 5 years ago. So we'll look at it much more deeply.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark, and thanks for being here the last week or two. You're heading off to London tomorrow, and then back home next week.
A little bit of news work. I'm going to get a picture of the Bilderberg Association building at 2 St. James Place in London, and a little sightseeing, and then back to Texas.
Okay, thank you, and thank you, David. Any closing thoughts?
I would like to point out the Bilderberg Association is another Scottish-run organisation. The gentleman concerned is Lord Kerr of Kinlochert, John Olaf Kerr, a former diplomat. So he's the main man, and so that'll make you feel much better, because we all know that if you put a Scot in charge, there's never any conspiracies.
I am becoming increasingly aware. You know, I do have this thought that the British are responsible for quite a lot of the ills of the world, but actually I'm discovering that it's the Scottish.
Oh, we invented the modern world, including the ills. There's a chap in Edinburgh Castle who will, one of the people who shows you around, who rhymes off all the things that Scots invented. And it's a huge long list. It goes on and on and on and on and on. And at the end he says, I'm not sure who invented the toilet seat, but it was a Scot who decided to put a hole in one. Right? So we have a record that we can be proud of. But there's a flip side to this, right? If you look at ills, we're up there punching way above our weight. It almost looks like a conspiracy, but
Yes.
I assure you it's not. Well, at least if it's one, we're not all in on it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mark.
You're welcome.
Thank you for watching. We will be back as usual on Monday at 1 p.m. Have a great weekend. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.